Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of UB on the Move, brought to you by UrbanBound. UrbanBound, for those of you that need a reminder, is relocation management software that helps organizations dramatically improve how they attract and retain talent by rolling out the red carpet for candidates and full-time employees who have to move for their new roles, like physicians, advanced practitioners, etc., while simultaneously saving organizations tremendous amounts of money. I'm Michael Craftsman, one of your co-hosts. With me is Jeff Ellman, my fellow co-host, who is going to introduce today's amazing guest. Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, Michael. I am so excited to have the opportunity to introduce Colin Lyle today. Colin's one of my favorite people that I've had the chance to work with and get to know in the healthcare industry. He's got a world of knowledge as to be shared during today's show. He is a talent acquisition leader, speaker, and coach with 17 years of experience. This includes leading and transforming teams to maximize process efficiencies, implementing innovative strategies, pipeline analytics, and workforce planning. He's also someone that is on the road all the time, speaking just about every conference you can imagine in the healthcare industry. I'll give you some examples. He spoke at ASHRA, Leap HR, LHC, Basecamp, Human Capital Institute, SIA, and the Healthcare Source Talent Symposium. Colin and his elite team of talent acquisition people are nationally recognized. They keep winning all these prestigious awards. And he is someone that we're going to be diving into, asking lots of great questions and learning as much as we can through the next 30 minutes. So Colin, got some quick questions for you to get things started. Please share a little bit about yourself and how you ended up working in the healthcare space.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jeff, for having me on the podcast today. Excited to share my story with the UrbanBound community. So been in the industry for almost 2 decades. And I found myself, into healthcare after a stint in manufacturing and engineering. I love health. I love talent acquisition and recruitment. Helping people find their next career move, is always a rewarding piece of being in the recruiter seat. And when I looked to make that transition to healthcare, thought what better industry, that really helps every person in every marketplace in something they need, which is, proper health and saving people's lives. So transitioning to this particular market has been, a great journey for me, and I'm happy to be in the healthcare space today.
Along that journey, when you think about talent acquisition and the changes that you're seeing in the marketplace, where do you see the future of talent acquisition? And also, can you touch a little bit on like AI and where that's going to impact organizations such as where you used to work at AdventHealth or other large healthcare organizations throughout the country?
Yeah, so, talent acquisition and HR, maybe, in a broader stroke, is historically, in my opinion, looked at as a transactional function. What I've seen the shift into healthcare HR and talent acquisition today is more of a strategic function. So especially post-COVID in the healthcare market, HR finds itself in many places finally having a seat at the executive table. So it's not just this overhead transactional, methodology, but now it's a strategic function that is contributing to the greater good of the business and has a seat at the executive table. So I think that's an important transition that we've seen over the last several years. When you talk about AI, we could go down a rabbit hole here. Healthcare historically, I think, has been slow to adopt emerging technologies, and still in many spaces today, they might be behind other industries when you talk about developing a mature tech stack. AI is one of those pieces that a lot of organizations and industries are just starting to get into. So I feel like this is one of the areas where healthcare might keep up with the pace. So I'm very curious to see how HR and talent acquisition teams start to integrate different AI platforms. There is a fear-based mindset, I think, a lot around the community about, well, is AI going to take our jobs away? When we talk about some of the transactional, repeatable tasks that are part of talent acquisition and HR teams, my quick gut reaction is no, but it's who's going to learn to use those tools, operate those tools the best, that are going to be able to maximize the performance of the AI function. Do I think it'll build some efficiencies to maybe lower, a headcount here or there? Potentially, but it's people who adopt it and use it the best are going to be, the best benefactors of AI.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's going to be about being more efficient and being able to, frankly, have better results by using these tools to actually get what you're looking for. So yeah, I totally align with you on that one. When you think back on your career, and even as you're working with companies today and consulting with them, what do you think the best healthcare organizations are doing to really stand out from their competition when it comes to recruiting and finding talent and getting people to, want to join their organization, really just attracting that talent that's out there?
So there's no silver bullet. What I have found in my experience working with small, medium, large organizations is that the highest performing teams are the ones who do the little things right all the time. But consistency cannot be understated. When you're talking about a transactional process, if you're seeing inconsistencies, you're not going to see that success. When I think about recruiters specifically, it starts with time-based planning. So I think when you look at having high volumes of work, many different hiring leaders, many different transactions, candidates, requisitions, it's prioritizing the items in your day that are going to move the needle, that are going to focus on your actual production and productivity versus what we refer to at RogueHire as more whirlwind work. So these are things that happen all the day. You get calls, you get interruptions, you get emails, but how do you build in the tasks that ultimately are going to move the needle in terms of productivity? So making sure that you're planning that time to have that efficiency with your tasks and not letting your day control you are going to be one of the first and foremost kind of teachings that we teach recruiters in terms of how to be a successful team member. You need to take a candidate-centric approach versus a requisition-centric approach. In these short supply markets in healthcare specifically, you'll see shortages of clinical professionals, doctors, nurses, so on and so forth. You're only going to get one shot for a lot of these applicants or candidates that you proactively source. We see in our data sets that most candidates are only applying, or they're applying, the 70% of candidates are only applying one time, and they're not going to apply again. So if you do not have a candidate-centric approach to capture them, nurture them, and put them through your screening selection process properly the first time, then you're going to miss. So you have
Can you
to
give an
have
example? What's an example of that? You talk about like a candidate-centric approach. What does that mean?
So I look at it where historically you be a recruiter, you have a list of requisitions that you're working on. So you're trying to fill, 100 recs, 50 recs, whatever that is. And you're looking at your day in, here are the recs, here's my aging positions, here's where I might put priority on trying to focus on filling jobs, versus I have a pool of candidates. Now, I'm trying to find this one strong candidate that has a great skill set, that wants to be a part of my organization. My mindset is to work and nurture that candidate for multiple positions, multiple departments, through multiple recruiters, rather than I'm focusing on this one rec. This candidate might not be the perfect fit, and they get rejected in the process. And that's a pretty standard process. They don't meet the qualifications, I reject them, but they may have been good for something. So I need to look at that candidate, work them to the best possible fit in my organization, and that's how you're going to see more wins, rather than focus on just filling the one singular requisition and the candidates become a product, where now the candidate is the sole focus and my requisitions become the product. So that's the shift in this kind of candidate to requisition centric mindset.
Well, that makes perfect sense. What do you think, thinking about like retention, when you match the right candidate to the right role, to your point, theoretically you should have, longer term retention there. But why do you think so often healthcare organizations are struggling with their retention numbers? And and have you seen any examples of, organizations that have done a really good job extending the retention data?
Okay, so retention, I'll have a few points here. So I think, one, a lot of organizations don't have strong internal mobility programs. So you think of even an internal application process, most of the time, they are treated just like an external candidate. So you apply to a job, you get routed through the talent acquisition function. I might see as a recruiter, this is an internal candidate versus an external candidate, but many times there's no separate process. So I think about the ability of strong organizations with better retention initiatives have strong internal mobility programs to help team members find the position that they're looking for. Because we all know that if they're applying for a job internally, the likelihood they're applying for a job externally is probably high. So if I don't, back to this candidate nurturing, candidate centric mindset, I think it works both ways. But is there a different path? Is there a different process for your internal team members? Do we give them white glove service versus put them through the normal transactional process? Teams that are able to be agile with their internal mobility will retain a higher percentage of their employees. So next piece, when I think healthcare, a lack of flexible scheduling options. So flexible scheduling is a hot topic. Historically, you think, maybe I'll use nursing as an example, 12-hour shifts, 3 days a week. This is it. This is how we build the platform. And that's how all the hospitals run, across the country. Teams that are finding more flexible models to work, well, maybe they can only work a 6-hour shift. Maybe they can only work Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays, but the system requires them to be open for all 7 days. And they have a lack of flexibility where so often you have a great candidate that meets the skill set. They want to work for your organization, but we don't have flexible scheduling options. So now you just lose out on that great candidate. So the more flexible you are, the more talent you're going to be able to bring in and ultimately retain those team members, right? So we're talking about retention. If they have a change in their personal life scheduling, they want to move to a different schedule. If you allow them to do that, you're going to retain a much higher percentage than force them to go to the outside to find an option that's going to work for them. Lastly, on retention, I'll probably say capturing your employee, but also I think this candidate experience through that onboarding lens. Most teams aren't even capturing it. And we know, based on our data, is that, yes, if you're nurturing them in that first 90 days, that's going to tell you a lot about the next 6 months. If they're good in the next 6 months, that's going to tell you about their first year retention. If they're good in the first year, that's going to tell you about your 3 to 5 year retention. So I think measuring and capturing that candidate experience during the onboarding phase is critical for your retention initiatives.
I was curious around, when you talk about retention and attracting talent, and out of market hiring right now is skyrocketing. We're seeing amongst our client base. They can't find talent in their own backyard. Therefore, relocation is now a core part of their hiring strategy. Yet, I would say almost 95% of healthcare systems we talk to will acknowledge that they're doing a really poor job of actually supporting the physician, the nurse, and their families when they need to move. They're just giving people money, wishing them good luck. It's a reimbursement up to a certain dollar amount or a lump sum of money in their first or second paycheck. We're seeing change happen right now where people are realizing they need to do a better job. But why is that? You talk about the industry being laggards and not being willing to change with technology or with innovation or with different service offerings. But why do you believe that the industry has been so slow to actually support those who need to move to take the job?
So back to the healthcare specific industry, post-COVID, it's a whole different world. And supply and demand, the war for talent is as strong as it's ever been. So a lot of healthcare systems aren't used to having to look at from 5% to 10% to 20 plus percent of their hires are coming from relocation. If you're used to single digit relocation percentages, then maybe it's not a big concern. But now as you're looking at a tapped local market talent pool, you're having to expand to a regional market, even to a national market. So it is a national competition for talent in healthcare. So you have to be able to now relocate people coast to coast to be successful. And you're going to be looking at double-digit percentages in terms of your hires from relocation. So it wasn't a problem years ago as it is today because the competitive landscape is different. And so now they have to look at, well, am I going to be, a top competitor for this talent? And I think systems that aren't as mature in relocation programs are struggling. And so in my experience and, partnership with UrbanBound is, I know as a great leader, I don't have to be great at everything, and that's okay. But I bring in subject matter experts that are going to help me increase my productivity and capture that audience. And that's something I think a partnership with UrbanBound does, because my team doesn't need to be the expert. UrbanBound can be the expert. So it's how are you leveraging your tools and resources to help you capture that relocation, the non-local market audience, and give them a successful relocation onboarding experience. If you're able to find opportunities like that, then you're going to be a market. If you're trying to do too much yourself and you're not mature in that function, then don't expect to be at the top of the podium.
Tell me about something that RogueHire has done that you're really proud of. that you'd like our listeners to know about?
We empower healthcare talent acquisition teams to do their best every day. I mentioned kind of at the beginning of, how I found myself into healthcare, and, kind of tagline for us is, we help change people's lives and we help save people's lives. So when we talk about benchmarking, analytics, training, education, a broad healthcare community, this is a space where organizations that come to work with RogueHire see more successful talent acquisition results. And if you see more successful talent acquisition results, you are putting more hands, more caregivers at the sites that are going to help our families and our loved ones and people within our communities. So just being able to help teams tell their story, being able to help teams advocate for themselves and why the talent acquisition recruitment function is so important in healthcare. Again, not just transactional, but strategic. That it's ultimately, helping change people's lives every day. So it's a passion project for me and something that I get to wake up every morning and knowing that we're making a positive impact.
Love it.
And Colin, we've had some of our clients say that they can't imagine trying to perform their job without the support of RogueHire. And oftentimes it's going back to some of the benchmarking studies that you guys have completed. What are some of the key learnings that you've had from some of your benchmark reports, or even aha moments you're like, I wasn't expecting this result, but this is actually the reality of the world we're living in today with the data?
So many factors when you look at one sole organization and kind of how they look at their productivity and measure the progression quarter over quarter, year over year, helps you tell that story. When you look at a bigger picture across, the entire industry, well, the supply, some things that we already know, supply is lowering and demand is increasing, right? So you're seeing that gap continue to widen, but you're seeing the elite teams, the top quartile performing functions, start to spread from the pack. So I use this kind of analogy like the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. So the teams that are adopting sourcing, talent attraction, recruitment marketing strategies are gaining more talent. Teams that are adopting changes to their standard operating procedure, looking at different screening selection methodologies, teams that are being more candidate centric, their efficiencies are growing and they're capturing more with less. You see teams that are measuring their candidate experience, measuring their hiring manager satisfaction, building that partnership with, well, your candidates are also your consumers. So what does that tell me about my local market? Am I taking good care of them? And am I building a strong partnership with my hiring leaders, with the operations, with the business? And do we see ourselves as strategic partners in the human resources space? Those are all things that, RogueHire helps with our community with, and things that we see the best of the best are really building a large gap from median to the low quartile benchmarks.
So speaking about, some of the best examples that you see out there, again, given this environment that's getting more difficult to find talent with more scarcity, what are some of the best examples or example that you've seen of an organization really doing something innovative to break through the clutter, break through the noise, and find the right individual to fill a specific seat that they have open?
So I mentioned the internal mobility programs as one.
Yeah.
When I think about screening selection methodologies, a lot of those teams are starting to work their candidates through centralized hiring models, and it's a successful model that I've built in my past experience. Say, well, when we have one candidate, rather than go through multiple positions, multiple requisitions, multiple hiring managers, you will have an expedited subject matter expert to say, I meet Jeff. Jeff is a great clinician. I'm going to make the sole hiring decision across multiple departments or multiple campuses and where to place Jeff. And that will lower that screening selection time by weeks in some instances, or limit the points of contact. Instead of one candidate, think if you apply to a job, I have to talk to multiple points of contact, multiple recruiters, but now it's one, right? So I might work with one recruiter and one operations decision maker to look over 13 different positions. So I think that's a highlight for me in my experience on helping to develop those elite teams.
How do you get the buy-in at some organizations to make that change happen? Because what we have seen is some organizations, you end up with, we'll say, decision makers in different parts of the org that are very set in how they like to operate. And, that approach, which makes perfect sense. You could see some viewing that as potentially being like, you're getting onto my turf now a little bit.
So yes, I think, the giving up the reins as a specific unique hiring leader can be tough, and change management is difficult. Something I've leveraged in the past to help those conversations is many healthcare organizations are utilizing contingent labor, agency, travel nursing, and many times that process is a totally different process. They're submitted by a third party agency. They go through a very quick screening, check the box item, and then 2 weeks later, they show up on your unit. And you are forced as a hiring manager to work with this new entity, make it work, ingrain them into your culture. Maybe they'll be there 13 weeks, maybe they'll be there longer. But there wasn't any vetting in that process. And most times, and what we see with a lot of our community members, there are huge initiatives to direct hire, to convert those clinicians, to convert those agency travelers into full-time employees, right? So there's active initiatives. Let's convert them to perm. But in the first place, how did they get there? They were sent by a checklist. So why can a third-party agency send you someone that you've never talked to before? Wouldn't you trust your own recruiter or your own partner, Jeff, in this example, to make that decision? They're a culture fit, they have the skill sets, and they're going to come work on your department, Michael. I'd probably trust Jeff or my own internal recruiter that knows my business, knows my culture, to make those decisions than a third-party vendor. So oftentimes that's a great example. Say, well, you're already doing it. Right. So whether I'm making the decision, whether somebody else, you're already doing it, and you're trying to hire those people permanently anyway. So wouldn't you think you could give us a shot? And that was ultimately like, that's a real realization moment. Not to mention that I'll pull reports, and I advise my clients to do the same advocacy for their teams. They'll pull a report of all the agency contractors they have working, and then scrub it against your submittals in the last 3 months. How many of those people did you actually already submit and they didn't make it through the process? But now 3 months, 1 month later, 3 months later, that same entity is showing up, and now you're paying a premium price for them. Yeah. So those are examples to help, change that culture and screening and selection that I think will make a good point for your teams.
I'm sure Michael's thinking the same thing as me. You're kind of sharing our language right now and our background. Even before we started Urban, we started another HR tech company called Hireology, and there's about 8,000 companies on this platform. And we went back to day one. If we go back to day one of that company, we found that most organizations lack a structured hiring process with centralization, and being able to have a scoring methodology for each interview, knowing what questions you're going to ask, what answers you can look for that would actually predict success. So when there are systems in place and having a centralized process, and you've got a platform, whether it's a Hireology or any other applicant tracking system out there, it probably does make it easier to have a centralization approach to recruiting, because it's not just like, it's not subjective anymore. It's very objective. The fact that I can see this person scored a 91% based on the following criteria. So I'm glad to hear that's going on with the winning organizations, because it makes complete sense to me. I'm sure to Michael as well.
So that's a great point, Jeff. And I'll make one more plug. Besides what I think more innovative screening selection methodologies, workforce development programs are growing and expanding, and we're seeing a huge adoption in this. Not just your academic partnerships, which I think a lot of healthcare systems picture that as maybe their graduate nursing or new physicians, keep people coming in those traditional tracks. But I think more often people need to be thinking about your non-clinical pipelines as well, and your maybe entry-level clinical pipelines like a CNA or a patient care tech, not just your registered nurses and not just your physicians. So, workforce development programs, working with middle schools and high schools, working with government entities, working with DE&I initiatives, military initiatives. These are things that are important for your workforce development. So teams that are very mature and working those programs well are seeing greater success than some that are just getting started. So if I had a piece of advice for a group from a strategic standpoint, let's start looking at deeper ties to workforce development programs.
Has there been any technology that you've seen being utilized by maybe some of the top tier orgs that you guys work with that has really made a difference, or seems to be helping advance that organization's hiring initiatives, etc.?
Yes. So a few things that are unique in terms of some stats. So we just released the 2024 benchmarks, and I will use this particular category called candidatory. It's a unique statistic and KPI that we just started tracking a year ago. What candidate inventory is telling us of is how long, in essence, how long were the candidates that you hired? So if I hired 100 people, how long were those 100 people already in my ATS before they got to the job that I hired them on? And the industry benchmark, the median benchmark in 2024, it's like 560 some days.
Wow.
So you're telling me that if I hired, and our benchmark is almost 1 million fills, so a huge data set, so about 750,000 hires. Of those 750,000 hires, on average, the median, they sat in the ATSs for over 500 days. So where I'm going to from this, when that blows our mind, is like, oh my goodness, do we have a candidate attraction problem? Do I need to spend $3 million on growing the top of the funnel and getting 20,000 more applicants next month? Or do I have a candidate rediscovery issue? Or do I have candidate efficiency issues, which we talked about earlier? You apply to one job, you don't get it, you get rejected. Now you're in the black hole of ATSs. Now, no ATS is perfect, right? So they all have the same issue, but they're not great sourcing tools. They're not great candidate re-identification tools. So when you see tools that maybe overlay with your ATS to help feed up candidate rediscovery, when you have high functioning CRMs partnered with your ATS, those become now sourcing tools. So your sourcing team doesn't always need to be out on the Indeeds and ZipRecruiters and LinkedIn's of the world trying to find passive talent. It's how do you better data mine your own database? So if I say almost 1 million hires sat on an average of 500 days, most of the people in our community we're trying to hire are already there. But you can't find them and you can't manipulate the system well enough to bring them back to life. So teams who are able to do that really well and partner with technologies that can help candidate rediscovery, they're going to pay huge dividends.
Yeah.
What's an example of that? A piece of technology that a listener today could say, you know what, I need to look at this. Candidate discovery is something probably we're not doing a great job at right now. What's the first step? Probably the second step they should be taking.
Well, there's a few different platforms, and we've seen several. In my own personal experience, using a product, like a Hired Score, using a product like a Phenom. Those are both tools that have many different pieces of their technology to help bring those candidates back to life. So as you start looking, every organization is going to have kind of their own unique needs, but sometimes just working with your own ATS to say, well, what can you do? And if you've scratched the itch and checked all the boxes internally first before you go spend money on the outside, that might be where I would start. So it's, hey, am I working kind of inside out? Am I able to do any rediscovery initiatives or campaigns, boomerang campaigns? These are things that you can control that won't cost you any extra money. So I can export candidate IDs. I can export past applicants from my ATS. It might not be that easy to search like a Boolean search on Indeed or Monster or Career Builder, but it is something that I can pull a skill set, say, well, here are all the nurses that applied in the last 18 months. Great. At least I have that list. Now I can start engaging them in a one-on-one manner versus by the time you start getting new technologies that can help feed you out those better insights. But you can start there on the inside and then start looking on the outside for different vendor relationships.
So this is a little bit more of a light question, but what purchase of $100 or less that has most positively impacted your life that you made in the last 6 months can you share with us and our listeners? Just anything that's really been something that you're like, I'm really glad I got that thing.
That is a great question. So, we were talking earlier about, travel. I've been gone, 23 out of the last 35 business days. I don't love reading. Okay. I think that's like faux pas to say for any leadership, like everyone reads 17 books a day. I don't love it. But I will say something that made that easier for me is I purchased an app, which I think was $99 a year is the subscription. And it's called
You just qualified for this question by $1. Okay, we're good.
Well, it's, an audio book, but it's also your Cliff Notes, right? So it's giving me the whole book in 20 minutes or less. So when I'm, driving to the gym every morning, when I'm in the airport running around, I can crush, 4 books a day. No problem, just in my free time. So Blinkist is my best $100 purchase in the last year.
Yeah. And they're always on top of like the newest books that are coming out. Like you can continuously get like the most current, New York Times bestsellers, et cetera, correct?
Yes, 100%. So yes, I'm not sponsored, but if Blinkist wants to reach out to me, Blinkist, I'm here and I'm a fan of your product. So
We'll post your info in the notes. It's great.
And I'm also curious to know, Colin, you're such a wealth of knowledge for all TA leaders and really anyone who's trying to learn more about this industry. You're not reading as much as you just shared, but are there podcasts that you're listening to, blogs that you like to check out?
There are. So, TA in the Trenches podcast. Matt Reimer is the host of that podcast. Great space for TA leaders. The Bo and Luke podcast, which is the ASHRA podcast, is a wonderful podcast for all healthcare professionals. And you're going to get snippets where I think, versus TA in the Trenches is very focused on talent acquisition functions, where the ASHRA podcast is a little bit, wider breadth in terms of, HR as a whole, which I think great talent acquisition leaders focus on multiple parts. And the better you know other pieces of the business that you partner with, you'll be able to leverage that for your own team's success. So those are a couple that I listen to on a regular basis.
Well, Colin, we loved having you be on the move. You were the perfect guest for today's episode. I know I learned so much. I saw Michael nodding the entire time. I'm sure our listeners loved the last 30 minutes with you. So thank you so much for joining today's show. I look forward to future conversations with you.
Thanks so much,
Thank you guys
Colin.
for having me. I appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
See you soon.
So much.